All righty. Well, we appreciate everyone joining on tonight. This is our Tuesday night financial stewardship course. My name is Amy Wilson. I'm normally your host. Tonight we have a special treat. We have another guest speaker coming on to go over some information for us that will hopefully help us to understand the importance of our health and how it affects us in multiple ways. Um, Her name is Pashina Manis. She is my sister, and I really appreciate her coming on to speak with us today. She's married to one. They're currently taking care of a young man named young child right now, and having a blast with him. And she graduated from Texas Tech with a physical therapy, somewhere of equivalent of a physical therapist, I believe. And she's done very well for herself. So I'm going to introduce to some and present to others, no other than Pachina Manis.
All right, thank you guys. Again, my name is Pashina Manis. I am giving a presentation today on health and finances and kind of part of that intersection between the two. To start off with, I do have a bachelor's in exercise and sports sciences from Texas Tech University, as well as a master's in sports psychology and motor behavior from Texas Tech University, and a master's in athletic training from Texas Tech Health Science Center. That's just to list off some of my credentials for those who may be wondering what gives me the authority to speak on this topic. Okay, so health and finances. It says, you can't enjoy wealth if you're not good in health. That's an anonymous quote that was come across. Okay, so there are some negative effects of poor finances. So if you're having troubles and struggling with your finances, it could affect your health. This is disclaimer, this presentation is not saying that if you are struggling or having problems in your finances, that you're automatically going to have these things or you're in poor health automatically, just if you're struggling with your finances. It's not saying that. It's just showing how there could potentially be a link between the two in some of these areas. So if you're having financial troubles, it could create more stress in your life. It could lead to depression if the financial troubles themselves or the stress being placed upon you due to those financial troubles. It could lead to lack or loss of sleep. It could lead to food insecurity, and it can lead to cardiometabolic diseases and chronic illnesses. And that just kind of, which leads to more financial trouble, which kind of perpetuates this endless cycle. So the first one is stress. Okay, stress induces the chemical changes in various aspects of your brain, such as the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala. And it's through acute stress. So there's a study done that showed some acute stress, which means it's only lasting for a few minutes to hours, can have actually positive effects on your immune system and on your focus, things like that. If you've ever seen like the stress performance curve, then you'll know that certain levels of stress can actually cognitively get all your cylinders and synapses firing in accordance and actually make you tune into something, make you sharper, creative, things like that. But if you continue on that stress performance curve, you'll see, well, let me back it up. At the beginning of the stress performance curve, you'll see that if you don't have enough stress, your performance suffers. So if you don't have any stress, physical, emotional, or something that challenges you, you'll feel underwhelmed, you get stagnant, complacent, and your performance will suffer. Some amount of stress actually has a positive effect on you. It gets your synapses firing, stimulates you. You get your, how they say, creative juices flowing, things like that. But as you continue along that stress performance curve, it's a bell curve. So as you continue up, you continue with stress, you'll hit your peak amount of stress that induces peak performance. But after you reach that peak performance, if you continue to add stress and stress and stress, you'll notice performance will go down and it will slow. And that can be physical performance, mental performance, just performance in general. It will actually go back down because now you're overstimulated. You might feel stressed out. You can't focus, can't concentrate, things like that. So you want to have just the right amount. So although a little acute stress and just the right amount can show some positive effects, chronic stress or an overload of stress can also negatively also alter your chemical responses and increase pathological immune responses, such as creating pathways for illness processes to start accruing in your body. And so it can lead to hormonal changes that can invoke a fight or flight response, and that leads to endocrine disorders. These hormonal changes and endocrine disorders can include the release of glycocorticoids, catecholamines. That's stuff like dopamine and endorphins, norepinephrine, stuff like that. It can alter growth hormone and prolactin. So those are some of those hormonal changes that can happen. It can lead to disruption of menstrual cycles, testosterone production, and infertility. And it can possibly decrease your insulin, which can lead to stress-induced hyperglycemia. Now, with the stress-induced hyperglycemia, that's also, in addition to, it also needs some contributing factors from the increase in other hormones around, but that's a possibility. Some of those other endocrine disorders and things that can lead up to that would be, so once those other hormonal changes happen, you can get endocrine disorders, including Graves' disease, which is an immune disorder of the thyroid. You can get gonad dysfunction, which is disorders of the testes, which is also called the gonads. And that disorder can actually lead to lower testosterone and affect fertility. You can get psychosocial. You can get psychosocial dwarfism. It's called psychosocial dwarfism, which is an inability to thrive. You might have behavioral abnormalities, and you'll have an inability to confront stress. It can be reversed though in as little as 3 weeks after being removed from the hostile environment or whatever's causing you that stress. But you'll see, oftentimes you'll see this in like kids, or especially like abused kids, things like that. And it can present in stuff in ways such as delayed growth or stunted growth, because it affects the release of the growth hormone or secretion of growth hormone. It can also lead to the obesity as well. And these are kind of ways that it does that. Okay. All right, so depression is the next one I was talking about. There was a study or some studies, there's more than one, that have found that involuntary job loss has resulted in depressive symptoms for those with limited net worth. So there's multiple studies out on this. Not all of them are relay the exact same information. Some of them show that it's kind of anybody in the lower class. Some of them show that it's not as great, but the majority have shown that there is a clear-cut delineation between that, the job loss and the depressive symptoms. And it's predominantly, though, in the middle class, not as much the very wealthy. So, and in relation to that, some studies have also found a correlation between increased risk of suicide or increased suicide rates at times of economic downturn and or job loss. So those who have lost their job or economic downturn. Once again, that was especially in middle class people, especially males. It was seen more common in males than females. And that could be just due to various things. So it could be, one explanation for it is that it could be that males tend to have that more stress on them to be providers for themselves or for their households, or they're seen by society more negatively if they can't provide than women are. And so they have those stresses on them. So that could be why it's targeting males more than females. It could be targeting middle-aged males. One explanation for that, more than female or more than any other age range, could possibly be that when you're middle-aged, that's usually your increase, usually your years of your heightened earning potential. So that's when you're trying to establish, get your life set up, get squared away, or you feel like you should be squared away and have a family and start your family and provide for them. So that's usually around the time frame those things are happening. Explanation, now the studies didn't say this, but an explanation in my opinion could be because when you're younger, a lot of times if you have economic hardships, you feel like you have more time in life to make that up. It's usually just you. When you're younger, you might be married with kids, but a lot of times it's more of you're relying on yourself. You may not feel as bad about if you have to go home and stay with your parents for a while or something like that to help out, versus if you're middle-aged or older, you may not want to rely on those people as much, or may not have that option. You may feel a lower sense of self-worth if you have to do those things, or you might have a whole family and it's just not feasible to go back home. And then if you're older, a lot of times they're more set in where they're at, or they might just process it differently. So it might be more stress onto yourself if you're middle-aged. So that could be explanation for why that phenomenon is happening more in that age range, associated with job loss and economic downturns. Back to point number one really quickly, and I'm sorry for jumping around a little bit, but I forgot to make this point out in number one. So an interesting fact of some of the studies have been showing, the studies that have found that correlation between job loss resulting in depression, is that they were typically seen more so in the middle class. Sometimes it was seen in the middle class and the lower class, but the main area that was hit hardest was the middle class. My own personal explanation for this could be because a lot of times if you're lower in a lower socioeconomic status or lower socioeconomic group, you might be used to or know what it's like to struggle and cut back and do that. So it may not change too much the way that you're skimping and saving and doing things like that to kind of cut back to just make a living, or you may know how to provide in other ways versus just the income you get for your job. You may know how to take care of your family. Who knows? I don't know that to be a fact of why middle class wasn't hit as hard as middle class, but and the very wealthy, and almost all the studies, even the ones that said that the lower class was hit, hardly any of them showed a big change or big correlation in the very wealthy. That could be because if they're very wealthy, they've already set money aside for rainy days. They may already be financially secure. They may have investments to live on and other things before they're really truly impacted. So so that was just it. I thought that was very interesting that there was a correlation, but even the ones that showed the correlations between the low class didn't really show much of a correlation for the very wealthy. It didn't hold firm for the very wealthy. So that to me is a big indicator of how finances can tie into depression. So, and my explanation for why it could be predominantly in the middle class is the same thing as kind of point two about middle age being the ones that's providing for their family, stuff like that. Same thing with middle class. They may have be trying to struggle to try to make it to earn their living, things like that. And those, they may be the ones closer to falling into either right on the cusp of maybe getting to upper class or maybe on the verge of one check away from falling into lower class, lower socioeconomic group. So they might be more of needing their job to provide their day-to-day living. So that could be my explanation. Like I said, no fact on that. It's just a possibility. And of course, the depressive thoughts can increase as stress increases. So the more you're continuing to stress out about your situations, what you're doing, the more those negative depressive thoughts can come in. And like you said, some of it may not be even because you're trying to. You may have start to get some chemical changes in your brainscapes because of the stress, as we talked about in the first slide. Stress creates the chemical brains and certain chemical changes in certain parts of your brain that can, and then that can lead to depressive thoughts, and it can keep triggering it to continue. All right. Lack or loss of sleep. So increases in cytokines that could, so when you have a lack or a loss of sleep, so you can have either total sleep deprivation, and this it happened in as little as 2 to 3 days of sleep, of total sleep deprivation, or just, so that would be a total loss of sleep deprivation. And the same thing happened in studies where they just had a lack of sleep, which means these people got their sleep, but they didn't have complete sleep. And these were people that were disrupted constantly through the night for whatever reason, or through their sleep patterns for whatever reasons, and they didn't get complete sleep. So these results I'm about to in some studies, these results I'm about to name off happened in people that has total sleep deprivation for at least 2 to 3 days, and those who had disrupted sleep for up to 7 days. They had the same effect. Disrupted sleep for 7 days in a row had the exact same effect as total sleep deprivation for 2 to 3 days. So they saw increases in cytokines, which could lead to an increase in inflammation, which can compromise the immune system. That leads to disorders such as just random infectious diseases, fibromyalgia, and certain cancers. So that having that increased inflammatory process leads to those. And the increase in cytokines related to that lack or loss of sleep can lead to the increased inflammation. So it doesn't mean just because you don't sleep, you're going to get cancer, but it's a continuum there. That releases extra cytokines in the body, and those cytokines then trigger inflammatory process. And then so increase in cytokines could increase inflammation in the body, and that inflammation can then lead to these disorders such as infectious disease, fibromyalgia, and cancers. So you can also have decrease in cognitive function, especially speed and accuracy. That's stuff like how fast you recite stuff, recall stuff, how quick things are coming to you mentally. It can lead to memory issues and attention deficits. It could lead to depressed moods, increase in endurance and physical performance, possible increased risk of diabetes, and stunting of growth. And that's all theoretically. Like I said, it's not, that's another one that's not a direct link. Like lack of sleep means you're going to get diabetes. That doesn't mean that, or lack of sleep means you're not going to grow. That doesn't mean that, but it just means it leads to some other processes in your body that could lead to that stuff. So, so when you get the lack of sleep, when you have a lack of sleep or a loss of sleep, growth hormone and prolactin secretions are increased, or I'm sorry, not when you get that, but just when you sleep regularly throughout the day, when you sleep and you get your regular sleep, growth hormone and prolactin is secreted, and it's increased during sleep. So in your regular sleep pattern, those two are increased. But cortisol and thyroid stimulating hormone are inhibited. That's the normal sleep. Growth hormone and prolactin are increased, and cortisol and thyroid stimulating hormone are inhibited. So therefore, when you have sleep deprivation, you get the opposite. When you get sleep deprivation or disruptive sleep, you get inhibition or of growth hormone, and the prolactin is inhibited as well. And that also leads to an increase in cortisol and thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, so long-term increased cortisol levels can increase your risk of cardiometabolic diseases and osteoporosis. It can lead to weight gain, and it can just lead to chronic diseases with that increased level of cortisol. So if you continue to have that lack of sleep or loss of sleep. Increases in thyroid stimulating hormone, that can lead to hypothyroidism and depression, fatigue, slow heart rate, intolerance to cold, changes in weight and or appetite. It can lead to constipation, joint muscle pain, dry hair and skin, and it can lead to hair loss or hair thinning. So it's important to get that sleep. So this all together leads to a dysregulation of the neuroendocrine control of appetite, which is consistent, and this is direct quote from the study, is consistent with increased hunger and alterations in parameters of glucose tolerance, which suggests that it can increase the risk of diabetes. So when you do that, your body's not regulating itself as much, and that can lead to glucose tolerance levels issues and increase your risk of diabetes. That's how that goes. And that's from a study in 2007 from Cotter, Hombach, Knudsen, Leopard, Miller, and more. Okay. So financial problems can also lead to what's called food insecurity. Okay, so there was a longitudinal study published in the Journal of General Medicine that found food insecurity in young adults aged 24 to 32 was associated with poor health, with self-reported poor health. It was also related to diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and chronic and obstructive airway disease. So food insecurity leads to those things, and it's related to finances in terms of these are people that maybe didn't have as much money or struggling financially, that didn't always know if they were going to eat or where their next meal was coming from. That's why it's called food insecurity. They weren't secure in the fact that they would have food, a means for getting food and for eating. So those that had that or financially struggling, sometimes it was cheaper to go for quick over-the-counter stuff, the quick, cheaper foods, which aren't always nutrient dense. that aren't always healthy. And then because of that, it can lead to increased glucose and carbohydrate absorption, things, or not absorption, I'm sorry, increased glucose and carbohydrates, things like that. You can oversaturate your senses and then become insulin resistant or have trouble regulating that. And that's what led to the diabetes in some, the health troubles, the issues absorbing fats, things like that. It led to the hypertension because a lot of those things are pre-processed and packed with a lot of sodium, things like that. It led to the obesity, obstructive airway disease, as we said in there. Okay. So financial issues could also lead to chronic illnesses. These are things, as we said, such as diabetes, hypertension, stroke, increase in healthcare cost, an endless cycle of financial and health problems. So these are what we call cardiometabolic diseases, because they have to do with metabolic processes and cardiac issues. So these are more prevalent. Some studies have shown that cardiometabolic diseases, which is, like I said, your diabetes, hypertension, things like that, are more prevalent in those of a lower socioeconomic status. So hypertension increases your risk of stroke, and medications for risk of stroke. Medications for diabetes and hypertension can get expensive. So, and especially if a stroke does eventually occur, because one, either you continuing down this path, like I said, you have food insecurity, so you just got to get what you can, and you might sometimes overeat that one because you don't know where it's coming from the next time, or you are already have these conditions and maybe you can't afford those medications because, like I said, the medication is mostly the medication for diabetes. Hypertension medication doesn't necessarily have to be that expensive, especially if you have insurance, but diabetic medications can be, especially if you need insulin and all those things. So it's say like if you can't afford your medication, things like that, and so those aren't under control, it can increase your risk for stroke. If stroke does occur, especially with hypertension, and if stroke does occur, or your medical condition worsens because it's not being cared for and treated for, then you might need either more medicine or more medical care, and therefore increasing your healthcare costs. So an additional medicine and medical care can exacerbate already strained finances. And that thereby creates that cycle that I was talking about of healthcare problems and financial strain, because you're already having troubles, which is with finances, which is leading you to take shortcuts and cheaper routes on some things to save money. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're stressed out, you're not getting sleep because you're stressing over money, fighting over money, things like that, fighting with your spouse over money, things like that. And you're stressed out, you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well. Then you start having medical problems on top of that, and then it just gets exacerbated. And now that's causing additional financial strain, which when you're already financially strapped, then that's causing even more stress, because now you have to put even more money out on an already tight situation. It's just a cycle. So a study from M. Harvey Brenner in 1979 showed that heart disease mortality increased during economic downturns, which is heart mortality, meaning people dying of heart diseases or heart disease related issues, that increase during economic downturns and a decrease in heart disease mortality during times of economic upturn. So that also kind of relates to the other suicide stuff, the stress things, stuff like that. Times of economic downturn are hard for everyone. Stress can also increase or exacerbate these metabolic diseases or processes. The study hypothesized that the link between the two could be due to increased stress level, including financial stresses, as many people were either out of a job during that time or experienced a significant decrease in income during that time. But they also couldn't ignore the possibility that some may have not chosen to go to the hospital. So they may not have chosen to go to the hospital for health problems and even significant pain during that time, also possibly due to finances. Maybe they couldn't afford it. Maybe they were busy doing other stuff, so they couldn't ignore that. It could be because of the loss of job or decreased income, or maybe they chose not to go. And if they chose not to go, that could also possibly be due to finances, which just not going to the hospital at all could have also proven to be fatal. So that could have either way contributed to that phenomena of that mortality level increasing during economic downturns. So costs. Let's get to costs. This is a financial class. Let's go back to money. So according to 2007 study done by Sullivan, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm going to say Jeshoen, Wyatt Wu and Hill. Individuals with cardiometabolic risk factor clusters, meaning a cluster of stuff like diabetes, hypertension, or other things like that, they missed 179% more work days and spent 147% more days in bed than those that do not have those cardiometabolic risk factor clusters. And that resulted in $17.3 billion lost annually in productivity. So talk about costing the economy, costing jobs and companies, and that could be attributable to some potential job losses that increases that stress, which increases the cycle. So, they say health, that's why job want healthy people. So, but just look at that number. That's a big number of money that could be pumped back into the economy, back into companies, back into employees, which means back into your pockets, back into what you're doing. So that's just loss of productivity. These same authors around the same time, so they looked at data. I think they looked at the data around 2005. They collected data, but they used it from the years of 2000 to 2002 during that time. And around that same time, they also did another study. Those same authors, they did another study looking at data acquired from that same time period. And it showed the average amount spent on cardiometabolic risk factor clusters was about $80 billion, with $27 billion being spent on prescription drugs alone. And that's not just what people are paying. Don't get me wrong, that's the total amount. So insurance paid a big deal of that, and then people paid a bit, but still that's the amount of money from insurance people altogether. That's the amount of money they predicted that was spent, not on all healthcare reasons, not on all healthcare, not on all issues, just cardiometabolic risk factors. Those are the ones that we're talking about: diabetes, hypertension, stroke, things like that. So that was 80, and that's between that only 2000 to 2002, 80 billion, and with 27 billion being spent on prescription drugs. And on average, they put that to be about $5,477 per individual, with $1,832 being used on prescription drugs alone. So that's a good chunk of change. Once you take out what insurance paid and what you pay, that's still a good chunk of change that most people, I'm sure, would love to have in their own pockets versus going towards just medications and things like that. And that's not including those who probably aren't, and just think about this, that number is not including those people that probably aren't getting their medications like they should and getting the care that they need because they can't afford it. So that's just only the people that could afford their care and their medications as they need it. So preventative measures, this is just a few things, of course, it's not everything to do, it's just a few quick things to do. So locate your source of stress and address it, whether that be your finances. A lot of people, it goes back, for a lot of people, it does go back to finances. Sorry, forgot to change that. So preventative measures, locate your source of stress and address it. So whether that be finances, which a lot of people, it could be work or finances, which those kind of go hand in hand in some ways. Even if it is predominantly their job, a lot of times, guess what? They can't quit their job because they need it for their finances. So a lot of times that goes hand in hand, or whether it's maybe the kids are screaming, or maybe it's frustration, things like that. And a lot of that stuff even still can go back to finances, because a lot of times if you're stressed out about your job, you can't quit it because you need the finances. Or if you're stressed out about finances and money, that makes your tolerance a little shorter and therefore harder to deal with kids that are screaming and running around, and you tend to snap on people a lot faster. There was a study, and I think this is a little funny. There was a study with animals done that showed that animals, when they increased the stress on these animals, the two animals that were in the same cage tend to break out into more fights with each other that they put under the increased amounts of stress. So that was a study done in animals. It's not necessarily financial, but just think about it. Those that were in the same cage. Think about when you go home, when you're stressed out, who's there with you? Your spouse. And usually, even if they haven't done anything wrong, that's who you take it out on, because that's who's there. So a lot of the times, stress can lead to a lot of fights between just those people that are closest to you and around, just because they're there. And sometimes all the stress can go back to finances and can make your fuse a little shorter because you're stressed out about things. So find what's the source of that stress, address it, come up with a plan. If it's finances, come up with a budget. Whatever it is, try to come up with a plan or a way to address it. Find coping mechanisms, ways to decrease your stress, if it's financial, ways to decrease your finances if you can. If you're already strapped for cash, do you need to spend $150 a month on cable? Is it worth it? Can you do that, or can you spend either not do it at all and just buy internet and stream and just be perfectly happy, or just spend $12 a month on Netflix and be happy? What's those ways can you decrease the stress or decrease the mechanism of your stress? Exercise, everybody knows, not only is it good for your body, it increases endorphins, it relaxes you when your muscles are tense and tight because of stress, which can be due to not only you tensing up, but actual chemical changes and stuff in your body due to stress. The exercise helps relax those muscles, and it helps endorphins flow. That gives you that euphoric feeling. So get your proper sleep. We already talked about what a lack of sleep does. So get your proper sleep and let your body reset itself. Sleep is very important. And I just basically scratched the surface or just touched a little base of how important sleep is. But it's one of the main things people underrate in their day-to-day life, and how it correlates with their health, and how it correlates with every aspect of their being. Because when you're not sleeping, you're not firing on all cylinders, and your cognitive processes are delayed. And how can that affect you? Your reactions are slower, everything that could affect you in so many aspects of your life, on your job and your personal experiences, in a lot of different ways. And eat a balanced diet. Make sure your body's getting what it needs, so you can reduce your chances of getting some of those cardiometabolic diseases that we talked about. And you're getting the nutrients you need. You can stay sharp, stay crisp. It'll help you get your proper sleep. It'll help you endure for your exercises, all those things. So these are just a list of some resources that I use to this. Everything I said did come from a source or a resource. I didn't just, I try to be bright, but I'm not that bright. I use the resources to come up with those things. The things that did come from my interpretation of those, I pointed out what was from my interpretation. Other than that, everything else was on the resources. And that concludes everything I have for you. Thank you for taking this time out to listen to me. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you, Amy, for having me. And it's been fun. Thank you.
All right. Well, we really appreciate what you brought to the table, Sheena. I appreciate all the information. I do want to open up any questions for Sheena on tonight about the information that you heard, anything that you want to bring forth. I will say she's not your family doctor. So if you have something that's going on, she will direct you to your family doctor. So don't come in with specific personal questions, but any broader questions about health, mental health, or anything that she may be able to answer for you.
Thank you. But I also like to point out, I'm not a psychologist either.
I got you on that, but you know what I mean.
Praise Lord. I do have a question. As you were basically making a point how lack of financial well-being can affect your physical health negatively, out of all the things that you were mentioning, and forgive me if you did mention this and I just didn't hear it, could that also be incorporated with, like, I guess, bone deterioration or like weak joints as well?
So yes, sorry about that. I was trying to find my mute button really quickly to unmute myself. But yes, so I did on one of those mention that it could also lead to joint and muscle pain as well. So that was back when I was talking about one of those. I said it somewhere in there, sorry. It can lead to joint and muscle pain, just due to some of those changes in there, changes in not only yourself, but maybe your level of activity, stresses, lead to tightness and tense muscles because of those chemical changes in there that could lead to stress on your joints and just cause joint pain. And you have those, remember, you also have that increase in cortisol that leads to, and those increase in cytokines that are released in your body that lead to inflammatory processes in your body. So that can lead to not only muscle, but joint inflammation, just inflammatory processes in general in your body.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Sheena, as you was talking, it made me want to go and find some information because I was thinking about just the finances of it, especially like medical bills, hospital costs, things of that nature. And, you know, you find so much on the internet and a lot of it's really close one to another, to the point where you realize we spend so much in medical bills. There's one website that was saying on Single Care Team that in 2009, the average people who were went on medical bankruptcy was 44. They were 44.9 years old. So the average bankrupt, medical bankrupt individual is around 40, almost 45 years old. They were 40% of them are married, 46% of them were married, and that was back in 2009. So do you think that's possibly increased or decreased by now? And I'm not really asking it to you, Sheena, but you think about it, the stressors, the things that have gone on since 2009, and they got more information for 2016 to 2019. But if you consider that the things have increased. So the fact that we are uneducated about medical bills, about our health, about things of that nature, we are steadily paying the hospitals and the doctor's offices for preventable measures, things that you talked about when it becomes to preventing us from having those illnesses and those situations. Now, not everybody can prevent it. Sometimes it's hereditary. Sometimes it just comes upon you, cancer and things of that nature. And you could be the healthiest person, just like currently with the COVID. There are very healthy people that exercise and do all those things and still end up with COVID and dying from it. It causes organ failure and things of that that I've heard of, at least from medical people, that it could still cause it in a very healthy person or fairly healthy person. And you have the fact of, they were saying that according to debt.org, that hospital costs average $2,600 per day in the US, throughout the US. And people in California is at $3,700 a day. So in Oregon, it's $3,200. And areas you could end up spending over $2,600 a day for staying in a hospital because you are sick. They said the hospital stays runs about $11,700 with Medicaid, $13,600 with other insurances, and $12,600 for paying top dollar, and $9,300 for uninsured. So when you consider that, if you don't have insurance, or even if you have insurance, there's a heavy cost of being in the hospital. There was one I want to point out for prescription from Georgetown University. They said that the average cost of a prescription for adult out of pocket is $177. $177 for average cost of prescription out of pocket. People aging 65 to 79 was $456 out of pocket. Now, they didn't put a date on that, but when you think about all Sheena talked about, a lot of that is preventative, but the cost keeps adding up and it doesn't get any cheaper over the years. A certain medication 20, 30 years ago may have cost you $5 to $100. Now it costs you 700 times that, sometimes 1,000 times that. They raised the cost of certain medications. So you went from used to paying only $5 a pill to $50 a pill to sometimes $100 to $200 a pill, because you have to have that medication and they know it. There's not much legal or policy or a governmental policy towards the pharmaceutical companies, so they get to somewhat control their cost, or what their prices, I should say. So so I really appreciate the information you brought, Sheena. It's kind of hard to ask you specific questions because you're not really looking at the financial aspect, but you brought a lot towards how you can prevent it. I want to ask once again, is there any other questions? Any questions that anyone has, maybe for me or Sheena, when it comes to financial aspects of the health, or anything that you may be thinking at this time before we let you go and pray out?
I just also want to point out, as you was talking about that, it just makes you think the next time you're at the store and you think that the fresh vegetables or the fruits are too high, so you're going to get a bag of pizza rolls instead, or something like that, because it's a lot cheaper. Just think, well, Is it more cost effective to go ahead and spend a little extra for the vegetables and fruit, or to spend $2,600 a day for a hospital bed? Or, or $10 a month for a Planet Fitness membership versus, and you don't even have to do that. You can just go for a walk every day. You don't even have to get a gym membership, but weigh out that balance.
Right. So the convenience of sitting on the couch comparably to taking a little bit of time out to go for a walk. They say, I believe 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes a day does so much for your health and your heart and other aspects of your life. Just going for a walk, even if you have health issues, unless your doctor, you want to definitely address your family doctor, your physician. But if they don't have any restrictions when it comes to walking, even some people that can't do very heavy lifting and things, go out and go into CrossFit and stuff like that. Usually you can just go for a 10-minute walk. You may not be able to go for an hour walk. You may not be able to go for a run, but a 10-minute to 15-minute walk could do a lot for your health. And I guarantee you, Sheena would agree with that that statement. Just going for just a 10-minute walk could do great for you, especially if you make it consistent. If you make it consistent and you don't do it on Monday and then wait 2 months or 3 months and then do it on another day and then wait another 3 months and say, well, I walked. Well, that's not going to do it. You're going to need to make it a consistent thing. All right. Well, I do appreciate everyone joining us tonight. I thank you again, Sheena, for spending time and allowing and giving us your time and your expertise on this subject, and are willing to address some of these things and bringing forth the financial aspects. I know you're not a financial person; you didn't go to school for that, but it does. Your field, when people are sick, it affects your day to day, in the way you go about it. So when people take care of themselves, you get healthier people coming to, if you ever have to deal with it. I'm thinking you're with the VA right now, but I believe you're dealing with those people. But even them, if they take care of themselves, it benefits your what you do in life. So I encourage everybody, take this information, watch the video, hear what she was saying, take notes, go research some of it yourself, talk to your physician, talk to your therapist, talk to the individuals that are the experts on this, and figure out what you can do to better your health, better your ability to take care of yourself. That way you don't go out and spend all that money on medication and things that you could be prevented from. And if it's unpreventable, then okay, there's nothing much you could do about it. In that case, you pray about it, let God lead you and provide for you in that area. But why put yourself in a situation, as Sheena said, that you could keep yourself from doing by going to sleep at night, going to bed an hour earlier instead of waiting until after 12. It's worth your time and effort to do some of the things she spoke of. But at this time, if there be no more questions, we're going to go ahead and pray out. And again, I thank you, Sheena, for bringing forth this information. All right, let's go before the Lord. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for blessing us with this information, with an opportunity to sit in on this presentation. I ask you, Lord, that you'll bless every heart and mind that heard it, that will watch it later, that they will take time to meditate on what was said and go forth to utilize the information to better their health, their lives, their finances, to become better stewards with what you have given unto them, their physical bodies, every organ in their body, their mental health. Lord, just bless them, oh God, that they will continue to grow stronger in understanding and wisdom, to do what is needed and necessary to be the best that they can be in their lives. So again, Lord, we thank you and we glorify you for all that you have brought forth. Thank you for Sheena and her husband and the child that they're currently underneath their roof. Bless them, oh God, in Jesus' name. Amen. Sorry for the
Thanks for
background.
having me. Bye, guys.